You're listening to AMI Audio. In a moment, you'll hear a special live broadcast of AMI Today in Victoria, British Columbia. Before we begin, AMI would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are broadcasting live from the traditional and unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, including the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. We offer our respect to their elders and to all Indigenous peoples who continue to steward this land. We are grateful for the opportunity to work and gather here today.
You're listening to AMI Today on AMI Audio. It's Wednesday, November the 20th, 2024. I'm your guest host today, Amy Amantea. AMI Today is doing a special live broadcast at the Indigenous Disability Wellness and Disability and Wellness Gathering at the Victoria Conference Centre in BC. This is the fourth time the gathering is taking place. It's brought together by and hosted by Indigenous Disability Canada and the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. This year's gathering is in recognition of the 10th anniversary of Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. It brings together Indigenous and non-Indigenous governments, service providers, and community members to learn and collaborate in addressing the unique barriers faced by Indigenous peoples with disabilities. Throughout today's show, I will be chatting with leaders in the community, featured speakers, and event organizers to learn a little bit about the conversations that will be taking place today. But before we begin, I want to just share with you a little bit of a description about the room that we're in. So this is a large space, a very typical conference space, very grand, very palatial. It feels very welcoming in the space today. There are lots of tables that are set up in this room. The tables are meant for attendees. Surrounding us are also tables for vendors and folks in the community to, share resources and such. At the back of the room, which would be behind me, is a stage where the presenters will be presenting. And so there are many presenters that will be joining us here today. And so that would be in front of me, or at the back of the room would be the entrance to the space. So that's a little bit of the setup here today. And I will just, for context, let folks know that I am a white settler person. So I think without further ado, we can welcome in our first guest, who happens to be sitting with me already today, which is Julia McEathron. And Julia is the National Coordinator for Indigenous Disability Canada and BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, which I'm going to refer to now as IDC and BCANDS because it's quite a mouthful, as you know.
Yes,
so just so folks are like, what is that acronym? They will now know that it's IDC BCANDS. So thanks for sharing some time with me, Julie. I appreciate you taking some time because I know conference life is busy life.
No, absolutely, Amy. It's such a pleasure to be on the show. I'm so happy to chat with you today.
It's really great. So an event organizer, a busy thing. It's like you work, all year round to this one ultimate, week where everything comes to culmination. How are you feeling? What's the gathering about? What can we expect from the gathering?
So you're totally right. So as you let listeners know, I'm the national coordinator for IDC and BCANDS. Thanks for showing the abbreviation. Saves me some time. So that's my regular day-to-day role. I guess I'm the unofficial event coordinator of the gathering too, so that's added on to my daily responsibilities as national coordinator. Just for a bit of context, I am from the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe in Ottawa, Ontario. So I've traveled a long way to be here, and I'm so grateful to be here. We're currently on the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations territory here at the Victoria Conference Centre. So it's a very, very busy 3 days, but I'm really, really happy about meeting all these new faces, seeing familiar faces, listening to our vast array of panelists, and really getting together and having these challenging but essential conversations.
Yeah. Are there any essential themes that are happening with the conference this year?
So this is going to sound a little silly. I think the overarching theme is really diving into the intersectionality within the intersectionality of Indigenous disability. So we're looking at really, really specific things within Indigenous disability, the challenges and the triumphs that these peoples specifically face because of their indigeneity and because of their disabilities. I'll give you an example. We've got a fantastic panel happening today, this afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific time with Dawn Canada. And that's looking at specifically the experiences of women, gender diverse, two-spirit peoples who are Indigenous and live with a disability. So that's really diving into the specifics, the nitty-gritty. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah. There's been some great conversations that have happened already. I mean, because we're right in the middle thick of things. Have there been any highlights for you already since yesterday, end of day yesterday? Because I spent a lot of time here listening to panelists and getting the vibe from the space. You know, what are your highlights? What are you hearing from people that have been to the conference?
That's a fantastic question. I think two things stand out for me. First of all, our board president, Stephen Litton, he's such a captivating, passionate speaker, and he did our keynote session for day one on Tuesday, November 19th. And he speaks from the heart. He is so passionate about the work that he does and the work that we do as an organization. And to hear his vulnerability and sharing his story, it was just such a reminder of why the gathering and bringing people together is so important, and how we're stronger together, and we're stronger when we share our stories. So that was really impactful to me, and I think impactful to a lot of our attendees as well, hopefully so.
Yeah. I'm friends with Stephen Litton, as we're both from the mainland of Vancouver. And I've heard his story many times. We've done work together. I've invited him to present at many artistic events that I'm involved in. And as many times as I've heard him speak, I could listen to it over and over and over, because every time you listen to him, there's some kind of new thread, something new that's nuanced in there.
Absolutely.
Because he changes it up every time, right?
No, right. A new perspective every time. I feel very, very grateful to know him and to work with him and get to share my heart and energy with him.
Yeah, it was really a great way to kick things off.
Oh, absolutely,
at the conference.
Absolutely. And then we had some fantastic panelists. We had a panel on the accessibility standards in Canada, and there were some very let's say dynamic questions asked by guests for our panelists, which was fantastic. So I'm really thrilled that people are really connecting with one another, connecting with people that they, of course, know, and people that they don't know. So that's also one of the highlights here. It's really a great time for people to come together and make those connections that, I mean, I live in a world of computers where I send emails all the time, and I know your name, but I've never met you.
That's right. Yeah. Now we're in 3D.
And now, exactly. So now it's just even more special to really come together physically and give a hug and touch hearts to the people who we're sharing our space with and our lives with, and the advocacy and work that we do.
So in talking about the work that you do, not only IDC and BCANDS, can you talk about like the organizing of the gathering and what kinds of things you do in terms of accessibility, brought into the gathering? Because I'm certain that there's a conversation there, and there's a lot of folks that may have access needs. And so what do you do about accessibility? Absolutely.
So just for a little bit of context, this is our fourth gathering to date. We hold the gathering every 2 years. So this is year 4, and we'll host our next one in, what is it? Oh my gosh, 2026?
Yeah, wow. That's not that far away. You better start planning.
Oh my goodness. So we, myself and my team, I certainly have not worked alone through this. My team is absolutely fantastic. And I'll say, Chimigwech, thank you so very much to the support of my team working behind the scenes. Because you know what, it's funny when you attend a gathering or a conference like this, it really seems like it just runs itself, right? But the work behind the scenes in the months leading up to it, just it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. But you know what? We're so fortunate that the vendors here, the speakers, they've made everything so easy for us. But in terms of accessibility, we're very, very fortunate to have the Island Deaf and Hard of Hearing Association here with us. So they're providing our captioning and interpretation services, and we're very, very grateful for them to be here. We've set up so for listeners, the event in and of itself is set up to be very friendly for folks with mobility issues, so there's plenty of space to navigate. Plenty of chairs. Our vendors are situated within the conference center itself, so vendors have access to the content that all the attendees are seeing.
Nice.
Which is also great. So they can listen in, and folks who want to visit a vendor but don't want to miss out on the content are able to do so as well. So that's
a great idea.
Fantastic.
Yep.
And the Victoria Conference Center in and of itself is also a fully accessible building too. So we're lots of good little accessibility items here.
And you've got folks like as in terms of attendees that have joined from across Canada, correct?
Absolutely. So this is a national gathering. So we've got folks from coast to coast to coast, coming from northern territories, or even folks just around the corner coming too. So it's fantastic the amount of networking that's been done with folks connecting who might not have met each other because of the barriers to travel.
Was there a way that the organization was helping to support folks that were traveling? Like, were you assisting in trying to book flights for folks or booking rooms or?
So I will share some of our sponsors. The Lawson Foundation, the BC CEO Network, and Inclusion BC actually sponsored a few Indigenous individuals who live with disabilities, sponsored their attendance at this gathering.
That's nice.
We're very grateful for them. So that way folks who might not have had the financial means to attend the gathering can do so, which is fantastic. And of course, myself and my team were also assisting guests with travel and accommodations.
All the admin stuff.
Precisely. And we've secured discounted rates for travel and accommodations for these folks too, to make it a little bit easier. As I understand, unfortunately, things like this, it's a bit of a financial barrier. So I think also for accessibility moving forward, don't hold me on this, but I foresee a online component for folks who can't attend in person.
Right.
One, because of the financial barrier, and also because of the travel. Right. We want to be as more national in scope and have that accessibility too.
And does that look like a hybrid version?
Perhaps. Yeah.
So that you can build relationships in a room and outside of a room, perhaps?
Exactly. Because I will be honest, I know a lot of folks find value in coming together in person, so I would be very hesitant to do a strictly online component. There's barriers to both, right? So I think a hybrid would be the best of both worlds, but ask me in 2026.
Well, it does offer, the more options we offer, the better it is for accessibility. I think we all understand that, but it also potentially brings in another thing that, the Murphy's Law of anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, when you add in another layer of tech into things. So, but I think that's the way the world is going, is a lot of these hybrid projects. So it can make things a little bit more accessible if you have access to internet connection, which is a whole other barrier.
Exactly. But Indigenous persons with disabilities, that's one of the main barriers that we see amongst many, many other barriers. But access to internet is a huge barrier.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about what's to come. Can you give our listeners a sense of what the vibe was yesterday in terms of the energy in the space, maybe what you were hearing people say, not in terms of capturing their exact words, but, just that overall vibe, because I know that you were buzzing around everywhere and connecting and building relationships.
Lucky for me, I was, and spirit seemed very, very high on day one. And even I was sitting at the registration desk at about 7 a.m. Pacific time this morning, and folks were coming in very, very, they looked physically excited and expressed their excitement for day 2. Right off the bed, 7 a.m., haven't even had their coffee yet. So that just goes to show that this is truly, maybe not exhilarating, but folks here are very, very passionate, and they're really excited to share their passions. But the first day, spirits were high. Everyone's got lots of energy. I think Stephen doing the keynote really set the tone for the day and for the conference for the next 3 days in and of itself too. So I think that really set a good tone. In our panels that we had yesterday, so we had an accessibility panel, we had a Canada disability panel, and then we had a presentation from the Family Support Institute of BC. And those 3 panels were very, very engaging, and folks had a lot of questions, which shows that folks are engaged, want to learn more, and have really listened into what the panelists have to say. So I've got high hopes for day 2 and day 3.
Well, you can. I right now in this moment can hear the laughter in the room. We haven't even started yet. You've got a ton of food out. You've been feeding people like it's a wedding banquet. The food just doesn't stop coming, which is also an access thing, right? We just don't know in the disability community. In general, but in terms of people who are Indigenous and in the those further intersections and those increased barriers, sometimes you don't know where the next meal is coming from. And so this is also something to consider when you're at a conference. It's like, well, you know what? Let's feed people well while they're here, and make sure not a bite goes to waste.
No,
right?
I'd rather have too much food than not enough, and folks have to not go for seconds because they're worried about an elder who hasn't filled their bellies.
Yep. And then I suppose if there's local folks, then, here, take some home with you, right? Like,
you know what? That's the one thing I will say. We because of food safety laws.
Oh, that's a hard thing.
They're not allowed to take it home. Now, be that as it may, if I see someone putting a muffin in their purse, I might not say anything. But I know that's the one thing I wish that's the conference center's rules. I wish we had a bit more flexibility on that. And I will say also, I'm thinking about accessibility too. So our food breaks. Now, historically, what we've done in the past is host breakout sessions or workshops during those breaks. Now, this year, it's a bit unique. We've foregone the breakout sessions and the workshops that are happening during those 30-minute breaks because we really want to give folks a break during the break. We don't want people to feel like they have to keep on listening to content, feeling like they're missing out if they decide to, I need to go to the washroom, and that might take a little bit longer, so I'm going to miss it. So again, that may impose its own sort of barriers. Maybe if folks want to learn a little bit more during this time, but be that as it may, the food breaks are true breaks, and we're really hoping that people take advantage of that and take the time that they need to have a break, do some reflecting, because these panels, they're fantastic, but some of them are a little bit heavier than others. So I really encourage folks to take care of themselves and take breaks when they need to, use our quiet spaces, and come back refreshed and ready to go for the next panel.
And so, Julia, how do you choose the panelists? Is that do you ask the community what they want to learn about, or do you put out sort of a proposal for people to pitch what they would like to be as a panelist? How does that process work?
So we've done a few different things. We have put out calls to proposal to disability organizations and Indigenous organizations and Indigenous leaders. And we've got a great network within our own community, both Indigenous and disability advocates who we've reached out to as well. And because we're a national disability and Indigenous organization, we see firsthand the barriers. We hear from our clients what the issues are, what they're looking to change, what they'd like to talk about, and what the federal government, for example, what they're really not hearing. So a few of our panels are actually panels that we've implemented ourselves, such as we have a panel later on today on the implications of medical assistance in dying, and how it impacts Indigenous peoples. So that panel specifically, we as an organization have asked guest speakers to come because we know from our organization's work, that this is a very complex and important topic to discuss.
Yep.
So, but other than that, we've had individual organizations who have hosted their own panels here too. So it's a bit of a mix.
Great. That's great. I have one last question for you, and we don't have a heck of a lot of time, but November is National Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. What does that mean to you?
So this is our 10th year. We're celebrating the 10th anniversary of Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. And I mean, within my role within the organization, I work heavily with governments, Indigenous and non-Indigenous governments, and I get to connect with folks on the ground about this.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I love doing the outreach portion because Indigenous disability we hear it's just tossed under the rug. It's such an unforgotten or a forgotten rather intersectionality within disability.
Mm-hmm.
So my role with advocacy and outreach is really important to me. I love having conversations with folks when they ask me, well, why is Indigenous disability important? Why is it even a thing? Why don't we just talk about disability?
Mm-hmm.
I love having these conversations with folks and shining a light on Indigenous disability. And that in and of itself is why Indigenous Disability Awareness Month was partly created and why it's so important.
That's great. Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's been really nice to share space with you.
Chi Miigwech, thank you so much, Amy,
Thank
and
you.
thank you.
Thank you. My next guest has just joined us. We are being joined by Haleigh. Hi, Haleigh.
Hi. Good morning.
Nice to be with you in space today. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. So Haleigh, you're the Senior Accessibility Researcher for IDC BCANDS. I'm starting to share with our listeners that I'm going to abbreviate that because it's quite a mouthful, as you well know.
Yeah.
So you're taking part in a panel discussion this afternoon.
I did yesterday morning.
It was yesterday morning, pardon me,
Yes.
on accessibility standards in Canada. What was that like? Give us a little bit of how that went and what the highlights were like for that panel.
Yeah, it went really well. I was quite nervous. I've not done a panel or a presentation like that before.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. But it was really exciting to talk about our work and what we've been doing the last 2 years on accessibility standards with First Nation communities. And it was also really great to hear from Stephanie Carew. She was our first speaker yesterday, and that was my first time meeting her as well, and hearing about the work that she's been doing as the Chief Accessibility Officer of Canada. And as she put it, the sort of chief influencer for accessibility, which I think is great to have that visibility. I think probably one of the best parts of the panel for me was just getting to hear from some of the people in the audience and have a little bit of discussion at the end around like where we're headed with accessibility and what those consultations might look like going forward, particularly for First Nation communities.
So, I mean, there's a lot of chatting about the unique barriers that folks in the Indigenous disability community face. Which is, I think, part and parcel why this gathering is existing. Can you talk maybe a little bit about those unique barriers and maybe how they intersect with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what I talked about in my presentation yesterday was some of the preliminary findings that we've had from our project, which really highlight some of those barriers. So one of the big ones that I think is particularly unique to First Nation communities is the jurisdictional barriers between federal and provincial, especially when it comes to accessing programs, funding, even in some communities doing work in the built environment, right? If your community is broken up by provincial land, it can be a bit of a challenge to kind of cohesively work on things like that. But also we know that First Nations have, in general, kind of a lack of infrastructure in communities, or it's outdated in a lot of places. And so that creates a really unique barrier for the physical environment where we're looking at things that are just not fully complete, like there are roads that are partially paved or fully unpaved in communities. There's no sidewalks. There are a lot of places that have makeshift accessibility support. So plywood over stairs to make a ramp. It's much too steep, but it's not carrying somebody over the stairs.
Right.
So at the same time, while First Nations face some unique barriers in their communities, they also have made different solutions. There's a lot more like a sense of community. People help each other out a little bit more often. But it's not a good permanent solution.
Right. I guess I'm thinking about, in terms of the work that you do, how do you involve people from the community in that work? in the research that you do?
So the core of our research is community engagements with community members with disabilities and caretakers as well. And so generally what we would do is we find a community contact, that's often somebody in the health or social departments, and we work with them to connect with the community members with disabilities, and then we come generally in person. We found that virtual engagements weren't quite as popular with communities. They prefer an in-person engagement. So the two of us, my research partner and I, we'd visit the community, we would meet the community members with disabilities, chat with them about their lived experiences and hear what are the barriers they're facing, and what ideas do they have for solutions. Like, what would they like to see to remedy those issues that they're experiencing? And so I think that's they're the voice of our project. We really want to center all of our recommendations, all of the barriers that we're finding around what we hear from participants and the way that they've lived their lives and what their needs are.
Right. And the project you're referring to is called A Path Forward to Inclusion. Path Forward to Inclusion. Just want to make sure that we're not talking about two different projects, because as a research, you could be talking about many different projects that you're working on at the same time. So for A Path Forward to Inclusion, how long have you been working on this particular project?
Just over 2 years now. I started with BCANDS in July of 2022 and started on the project at that point. And then my research partner joined about 6 months after that. And that's when we kind of really started in on the work.
Right.
So yeah, just about 2 years we've been doing that. And we've done 9 community engagements.
Right. And so reaching people through community, has that been a process that's been, air quotes, easy or difficult to get people to, sometimes you got to meet people where they're at, or you call people, or you visit them, or you there's surveys. Like, there's all different ways of meeting people. So what's it been like to try and get community warmed up to you, we'll say?
It can be a little challenging.
Yeah.
I think initially that was absolutely our biggest challenge, and not even just connecting with the community members, but just sort of finding a way into the community, a connection there. You're calling people, and when they don't know about the accessibility legislation, they're kind of like, why are you calling me about this? Who are you? What do you want?
Right.
But eventually we kind of found our way. The health and social departments tended to be a little more open to listening and kind of hearing what was going on. It's more related to the work that they would do in a regular day. And they've also got that pre-existing connection with community members with disabilities, as they're usually the one providing services or their healthcare. And that really proved to be the best way for us to get connected. And like I said, also in-person tended to be a much more well received. If we offered a virtual engagement, they were not super keen on it, but we said, we're going to come into the community, we're going to have an in-person conversation, we'll have lunch, we'll have a talk, it'll be a little more informal. And I think that approach really, really worked well with people. And then we also, after we sort of found our 10 or so participants in a community, we'd reach out to them individually and have an over-the-phone interview. So we had a chance to chat with them before we personally came into the community, so they had a bit of a reference point for who we were and what we were doing. And I found most of the engagements went really well. Community members were happy to have a space to kind of be able to just vent about all of the issues they've been experiencing, the struggles for their disabilities, and have that sort of be really heard and seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that a lot in some of the disability communities that I'm a part of, is that when you get us together, there's no shortage of conversation about all of the things that need to be fixed.
Absolutely.
And once you get rolling on it, it's like a riff. Oh, yes, this. Oh, yes, and this. Oh, yes, and this, right? And we can create a list quite quickly. But once you have that list and you've got this research project, what is the goal of the project? Like, what are we hoping comes out of the project? I mean, obviously there's data, but what happens next with that data? What do we want to do with that?
So, the sort of required outputs for our project, we're going to make a couple of big reports that'll go through Accessibility Standards Canada, and those will be made public that way.
Right.
We'll also make a large sort of collective community report, and we'll return that to all the communities that we've worked with. But ideally, the big piece is going to be the recommendations that we make on the Accessible Canada Act to the federal government. And ideally, those recommendations will help this legislation apply to First Nation communities in a way that works for them and also keeps them included, because there is still the question of, will they remain exempt? And we don't want to see that. And what we've heard in general from communities is that they also don't want to see that exemption continue. They want to be included in this legislation. They want to see accessibility standards in their communities. And so definitely a desire for the project is to help that happen, and to say this is what First Nation communities are needing in the area of accessibility, and this is how we think it should work and why it should apply to them.
Right. Touch on that exemption for a second, because when I was listening to this yesterday and you mentioned that, And I consider myself to be fairly aware in the advocacy work that I do about the Act and the bits of the Act and some of the regulations and who's a part of what. I had no idea about that bit. And I bet you that our listeners, most of them, have no idea.
It's definitely not well known.
So educate us on that, Haleigh, if you will.
Well, and I totally understand why it isn't well known. It's essentially just one sort of small line in this, very complex, long piece of legislation that says, currently band councils and entities operating as such are exempt from any regulations made under the Act until 2026. So it's about 2 sentences in the Act and the regulations. So it's easy to miss. And it's been cited that they've been exempted for more consultation time, which on the one hand I understand because, yes, they do need a little more time to get that information right and to spend that time with communities to really hear what their needs are. But also, they need to be included.
Yeah.
If we want to have a fully accessible Canada, which is the goal of this legislation, First Nation communities obviously need to be part of that. They're here in Canada with us.
Yeah.
And so if we want to be an accessible country, everyone needs to be accessible. And so the exemption, and Neil, yesterday, my boss there, put it, I think, quite plainly that we don't know that this is going to happen. We know that the cost of bringing communities to a place where they're able to meet these accessibility standards is astronomical, and it would require a huge commitment from the government to meet that. So it is hard to say whether or not it's going to happen. We obviously want to see it happen. We want to see accessibility standards across the board for everyone, especially in First Nation communities where it's hard to get some of that stuff done otherwise. But the exemption is tricky, and I think that people not knowing about it makes it more difficult.
There's no doubt about that. It makes it hard to rally, makes it hard to be an ally when you don't know from somebody who is not a part of a community what the barriers are.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's it was a really big, heavy takeaway for me. And then my brain went right away to the fact that there are still many communities, Indigenous communities, that don't even have drinking water. And so there are so many communities that are so far behind even having the basics of life-sustaining resources that have been promised for decades, right?
Decades.
And it's like, here we are trying to make things accessible. Well, can we start with
right? With
just
the
having
basics.
clean drinking water?
Just basic infrastructure. Well, and I think another thing that gets these things held up is this constant obsession with making everything culturally relevant. And cultural relevancy obviously is important.
Yeah.
And we want to see that. But, I mean, what makes a ramp culturally relevant?
Right.
It needs to just be a usable ramp. It does not need to have all of those extra sort of things to make it functional.
Yeah.
So culture is obviously an extra important piece with First Nations, but it shouldn't get in the way of doing what needs to be done. And I think the government sometimes likes to use that as a little bit of an excuse because it's an easy write-off for them.
Right. Is that like some direct feedback that you've been hearing from the community a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. Where they're obviously wanting to see things done in a good way, in their way, but they don't want it to hold up progress for them either.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot of takeaways for non-Indigenous folks like myself, who, although I live with multiple disabilities, so I know what my barriers are. I don't necessarily know what the intersecting barriers are of other communities. So I know what privileges I hold as somebody who's non-Indigenous. I know what privileges I don't hold as somebody who has a disability, and the other intersections that I live with. So I think it's really great that this gathering brings together both Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks, because we can be allies with each other. And I think there was a good point made yesterday by Stephanie Cadu that the disability community doesn't rally. And that's something that I've been saying for a very long time, because in the blind community, we have different needs than maybe wheelchair users, and different needs than maybe autistic folks, and different needs, right? And so if the disability community, 27% of us, and 30 to 33% of people in the Indigenous community, so it's a higher number, but if all of us were able to rally for each other's causes, like we could be such a really loud voice. And then of course my brain goes to politics, and it's like, what a big voting block that is.
It's
know what I mean?
huge.
My brain goes there, but as a community, it's really like, well, this is what I need, and what I need is more important than what you need.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like capacity issues there. And it's like,
Absolutely.
I don't have capacity to show up on a picket line. And
Right, and you want to be there for all
I
of those
wanna be
things,
there.
but sometimes you just, especially
Yep.
when you're dealing with disabilities yourself,
Yep.
you've got to really measure out your capacity. How many spoons do you get for that day?
That's right. Yep. Or if you have children to feed or rent to make and you got to go to
Mm-hmm.
work and all of those different things. So it's just not as easy as being able to show up at those kinds of events as maybe it might be for some folks in other equity seeking groups who
Definitely.
may have a different level of privilege to be able to show up at those things. So when we talk about intersecting barriers,
Yes.
this community, I always say to folks, this is the one card that anybody can be a membership of at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And the disability experience doesn't discriminate against any of us.
It really
right?
doesn't. And I think another thing that the general population really forgets, and maybe even different sectors of the disability community, is that accessibility benefits everyone.
It does.
It's for all of us.
Yep.
Regardless of whether you have a disability or an accessibility need at this point in your life, you probably will at some point.
Yep.
But having things be accessible is always a benefit for everyone.
It's true. I mean, parents with baby strollers use ramps.
Oh my goodness.
How many people carrying bundles, like doors that open automatically?
Automatic doors.
Right.
I remember having to carry the baby stroller up and down the stairs in the Inner Harbor here all the time because it was so hard to get down otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Haleigh, November, of course, as you know, is is Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. What does that mean to you specifically?
For me specifically, well, I'm really excited. This is the 10th anniversary
Yes.
of Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. But for me personally, I think it's just a really great time for us to actually spend the time to reflect on what that means to each person. Because I think accessibility is a really personal experience,
Yeah.
and so is disability. But I think it's a good time for visibility. I think that's the big one for me, is that this is the time to speak up, to be seen, to say that Indigenous disability, needs its own attention, it needs its own priorities
Yes.
because it has so many unique barriers and factors that go into it.
Yes, yes. This is great. What is your feeling about the conference so far? What's the vibe you're getting?
You know what? It's going really smoothly, actually. It's been quite fun. I really did enjoy speaking yesterday. That was a nice new experience. Yeah, it's been great. It's been nice to talk to different people. I've made a few new connections.
Awesome.
Doing this interview is quite exciting. I haven't done this before either.
This is great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you've done excellent, Haleigh, and I
Thank
very much
you.
appreciate you sitting down and having a chance to chat with me about
Well,
this
thank
today.
you for having me.
Awesome. So joining me now is Anna Salter, the Senior Cultural Researcher at IDC BCANDS. Welcome, Anna. Thank you made it in safely.
Are you guys having any connectivity issues as a result?
Not too many. We're doing pretty good. It's just I know that there's been some folks that are having difficulty getting in, and there's been some other power outages around the Victoria area. So that's been kind of a thing. But you've made it.
Shall I tell you a little bit about
Yeah,
the
why-
project that I'm
Absolutely,
that I'm
Anna.
representing
Thank
today?
you so much for offering that.
For IDC BCANS.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
Okay, so for a quick start, I'm the senior researcher on a new initiative of IDC BCANS called the Voices of Inclusion Oral Histories of Indigenous Disability Project. It's a 2-year oral history initiative, which will involve a team, the cultural research team, which is based in Ottawa, conducting 14 in-person and 14 virtual video interviews with Indigenous communities across Canada to learn more about disability from an Indigenous perspective, and in particular through a traditional lens. We just launched the project at the beginning of November in recognition of the 10th anniversary of Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. So we're still in the beginning stage of the project.
Right.
But we will be working nationally to identify, connect, and learn from Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers interested in sharing their insights into Indigenous understandings of disability prior to contact. And our hope is to bring the knowledge shared, the stories that we learn, into the interview context with community members to get their insights into how it could be applied to strengthen disability support systems and their day-to-day lives.
It's a lot, Anna.
So the knowledge, the teachings, the stories, how can they be applied to advance positive change?
Okay. Awesome. So it's just started in November, you said.
The team got
The
rolling.
funding, yeah.
The team got rolling maybe 6 weeks before that, but it was
Yeah.
launched. It was launched at the beginning of November in recognition of the 10th anniversary of IDAM.
Yeah.
And I should probably also mention that we're doing video interviews, and that the recorded interviews will be integrated into a final audio-visual presentation,
Okay.
as well as a written record, which will highlight the voices of all those interviewed, as well as the importance of viewing disability through a traditional Indigenous lens.
So can you maybe extrapolate a little bit further for me on what the traditional Indigenous lens might look like?
Well, we're still in the process of learning about that
Yep.
ourselves, as a team, as an organization. But one big, I should say, I think, perspective that I believe that was driving this project in terms of the funding application, in terms of the research that went into making a case for the importance of this project, is that the literature seems to say that in a pre-colonial context, the word disability did not exist.
I know this. Yes. Yeah.
And so far, the literature seems to have a consensus on that from different perspectives in different ways. But it's something that we have yet to talk about more widely in an interview context. So unfortunately, we still can't say much on that point yet, but
Right.
we're working towards being able to do so. And one of the things that we're hoping to do at the gathering today and this week is to talk to organizations and individuals about how this knowledge could potentially help the disability communities that they work with.
Right.
It's still our understanding of it is still, we're still working on broadening that knowledge base. So we can't make those sort of suggestions or recommendations ourselves, but we'd like to have that conversation with organizations and individuals to say,
Yeah.
how could this help?
Yeah. I learned that was a learning that was offered to me in terms of language by some Indigenous folks a couple of years back, and I found that to be so interesting and so beautiful that there wasn't traditional historical language for the word disability. That I asked these folks if I could use that in a land acknowledgement for an arts project that I do, because I think for me as a settler person, there are a lot of things that colonization, as we know, took away from Indigenous folks, and what our world would look like in terms of the disability experience if we had learned to treat people with disabilities the way that perhaps traditionally Indigenous folks had cared for people with disabilities in more of a community way. How different our experience as citizens, it would just be so different, I think. And that's just one piece of how different our world would be had we not colonized Indigenous folks, right? And it's when I sit back and think about it, I think, oh my gosh, things would be so much better. That's just my personal opinion. But it is a place where my brain goes sometimes when I think about those things. It's just that there's such a piece of beauty there. So you can ask, of course, organizations, but I wonder sometimes, because this concept of there not being language for the word disability is historical language, meaning that there may not be anybody alive today that still knows some of those oral histories, perhaps? How do you find the person or the peoples who may have that knowledge?
It's a very interesting question, an issue that you raise. Where, to be honest, we're still in the process of figuring that out ourselves. And we're at a stage in which sort of our hope is to keep the scope of this as wide as possible, to be able to, increase the chances of the possibility of generating or documenting, and thus being able to preserve a body of knowledge that could be as useful as possible to people or to communities as desired.
Yeah. So the process of being able to ask folks is really just to to ask them if they want to share their stories, I guess. Do you want to be a part of this work?
Exactly. The organization put together a participant request survey, which outlines a bit more in detail from a written perspective some of the hopes and dreams of the project, which could be accessed through the BCANDS website. There's a tab or a section that's dedicated in particular to the project, and that participation sort of request survey or questionnaire is a starting point for inviting people to sort of express interest in participating in the project and to share it with disability communities or people that they know might be interested in participating.
Yeah.
So that is an initial starting point, and then working on doing outreach on sort of a personal level.
Yeah. Building those relationships. Yeah. November being Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. What does that mean to you, Anna?
Oh, what does that mean to me? That's a very good question.
And it's going to be different for everybody.
In the context of this project, I see it as an opportunity. I see it as a very humbling opportunity to recognize that this project is one tiny piece in a larger sort of framework and network of amazing work that people have been doing to draw attention and highlight the importance of all these issues. So personally, I'm very honored that our team has the opportunity to participate in a tiny microscopic way, but hopefully nevertheless valuable as we move forward. And our hope is being here this week that we're able to learn from individuals and organizations on how to make our project better, to consult with them on ways that we can better reach different Indigenous disability communities across Canada, because the people who are here today in this room and this week are the experts. And,
right.
We appreciate the feedback, and we would love to hear from anyone who wants to meet with us. We have a research room, an interview room going ourselves, where we'd love to get feedback about our project so that we can bring it into the heart of the project.
That's very, very cool stuff. I want to wish you best of luck with this project. I know research can be heavy stuff, but I also wish you the best of joy, because I think you're going to build a lot of really lovely relationships. You're going to hear a lot of difficult things, but also I think you're going to see a lot of beauty in humanity as you go through this journey. So thank you so much, Anna, for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much.
Conversation with us.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anna. And joining me now is the Director of Indigenous Initiatives at Dawn Canada, Evelyn Huntjens. Welcome, Evelyn. Can you just do a visual description for me? Because with my legal blindness, I'm seeing some dangling earrings that may be traditional art. But maybe you can do a visual description so that our blind and partially sighted folks can have an idea of what you're wearing?
So I'm a older Indigenous woman
Okay.
with long dark hair. I've got some copper highlights in my hair. I'm wearing a black long-sleeved dress shirt, and I've got on a blue necklace with 3 little stones, as well as I've got some Indigenous earrings that are blue, and there's a hummingbird in them with little dangling beads of varying colors. I believe it's red, yellow, and white.
And is there a significance to the colors, Evelyn? Do you know?
The hummingbird is significant, as that's Dawn Canada's symbol is the hummingbird. So there's a really cool story behind the hummingbird, and we were in an event in Montreal, and one of my Hummingbird Feminist Disability Coalition members attended, and she brought me a gift. So she brought me these hummingbird earrings, and as a thank you for having her participate.
Oh, that's lovely. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So you are the Director of Indigenous Initiatives at Dawn Canada. I would love for you to maybe just tell us a bit about what Dawn Canada is all about and how your role fits in with that.
Okay, I'd love to. Dawn Canada, Indigenous Disability Canada have worked closely together for many years, and we had an opportunity for me to join Dawn Canada in a cross-employment position, and one of the projects that Dawn Canada was working on was called Rooting Resilience, and it's a 3-part project, so Rooting Resilience, Root Change, and Root Justice. And it coincides with the federal government's National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. So it's really exploring peer support in supporting survivors. So I had the opportunity to come as the Director of Indigenous Initiatives to bring an Indigenous perspective to the work that we're doing. So I'm in a leadership position, so really about building a community of practice between the nonprofit organizations that work in disability and being able to work with other organizations to share the knowledge that I have and to help support and build capacity around Indigenous ways when we're looking at the work that we do, and as well to learn about the work that's being done around the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence and the important work that our other partners are doing around that.
Right. That's a lot.
It's
Evelyn.
very, very busy.
Yeah, that's a lot. Very busy, very important work, probably at times quite heavy.
Very
Yeah.
heavy at times, yeah.
How long have you been in this role?
So I've been in this role. March will be 2 years. So I've been with Indigenous Disability Canada, or the BC Aboriginal Network on Disability, since 2016.
Right.
So quite a few years working in Indigenous disability, but my specific work that I'm focusing on right now has been almost 2 years in March.
Now you are leading a panel called Rooting Resistance, right? Examining best practices for Indigenous, women, and gender diverse people with disabilities
Yes.
through peer support.
Yes.
I have a very large print script here, and it's on multiple pages.
No worries.
Can you tell me a bit about this panel? I did notice that one of the panelists is a friend of mine, Sandra Ponto. So I'm really excited to see this panel, but tell me a bit about the panel and what the themes are for the panel.
So the themes are for a panel. So part of the work that I do is looking at building a network of Indigenous women that live with disability, that are survivors, and we have a national membership, and we created the Hummingbird Feminist Disability Coalition. So we have women across Canada that live with disability, where we bring them together to provide leadership and mentorship training, and really want to have women with disability leading in the work around the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence. So Sandra is part of our Hummingbird Feminist Disability Coalition, and through the relationship that we've built and the work that we've done together, I've been introduced to other women as we've done projects. So they're coming today to speak about their experiences with peer support in the work that they do. So both as survivors and receiving peer support, as well as giving peer support.
What do you think the importance is of a peer support program?
Well, when we're looking at gender-based violence, peer support saves lives. So there's that. It's a easier way for people to access supports versus like a clinical setting. Often it is a much more intimate, more trusting environment. So we're building an environment of safety where women can come, they can have their shared lived experience, they can share strategies on survival, share strategies on healing, access resources, learn other people's lived experiences. So often it involves being able to provide supports to women that want to leaving in a safe manner, identifying when violence is being escalated, providing them with the supports and services to gain financial independence. And there's just so many other things that peer support provides to women living with disabilities, because they're at such higher rates of experiencing gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Isolation and poverty are the two biggest barriers that women with disabilities faces, and particularly when we look at Indigenous women, right? So we really want to build a peer support program, and Sandra is going to help lead in that work that we're looking at doing.
Oh, that's really awesome. I remember one of my friends in the disability community telling me about being on provincial disability benefits and how that gets tied to your partner and how that relates to intimate partner violence. Because if your income's tied to your partner, how can you leave? You don't have access to your own income if you're on disability income.
Yeah, or if you're on income assistance and your partner earns too much money, so then they claw it back, and then and also the risk is too, when you have permanent disability income assistance, for financial abuse, right? Because that's a guaranteed source of income, and often poverty, it makes someone, we don't say vulnerable, we say vulnerabilized.
Right. Oh my goodness. Evelyn, this is thank you. I mean, thank you for offering this teaching. I feel really humbled to be in your space because I know the work that you're doing is good, and I'm really excited to learn more about the panel and to witness some of these stories that are going to be told this afternoon. So
I'm really excited for you to be here today. Yeah, we're really excited for our panel today.
It's awesome. Thank you so much for taking the opportunity to join us today.
Yes, no worries. Thank you very much.
That was Evelyn Huntjens, Director of Indigenous Initiatives at Dawn Canada, joining us today on AMI.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have, friends, on this episode of AMI Today. This has been a special live broadcast at the Indigenous Disability and Wellness Gathering at the Victoria Conference Centre in British Columbia. In fact, we're in Victoria, British Columbia. To learn more about the gathering, visit indigenousdisabilitygathering.com. And to learn more about the amazing work being done by Indigenous Disability Canada and the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, visit bcands.bc.ca. I'm Amy Amantea. Thanks for tuning in.